But we went on after them. And of course we only had that one gold outfit. You can almost hear Patti LaBelle's voice as she remembers the night. Another girl group had already hit the stage wearing the exact same shimmering costumes. It looked like we were copying them, she once recalled, half joking that she wanted to slap the woman who stepped out in the look she knew Patti's group had planned. One outfit, one chance. And in a business built on image, that kind of move didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like a shot. That was the music world Patti survived. A world of quiet sabotage and louder egos where even a dress could turn into a weapon. Yet, in the same breath, Patti could turn and offer pure reverence. Speaking about Dionne Warwick, she once said there was no other voice like hers, that Dionne had carved out a tiny, unreachable space in music that no one else could ever step into. No one could sound like Dionne. No one could sound like Aretha. No one could sound like Patti. But what if I told you that 10 of the most legendary black female singers, women praised as saints, icons, and untouchable divas, were surrounded by private romances and hidden entanglements so intense that the industry spent decades making sure those stories stayed off the record? What if the same world that worshipped them on stage quietly erased the chapters that didn't fit the poster? Because Patti LaBelle didn't just outlast the golden age of soul and R&B, she moved through it like a witness with a front-row seat. She lived through the scandals, the backdoor rivalries, the forbidden late-night visits, and the whispered confessions that never made it into any official biography. Behind every spotlight was a hotel door that shut softly at 3 a.m. Behind every flawless performance was someone in the wings that the public never saw. And behind every perfect smile at an award show was a story that could have cracked careers wide open if it ever slipped into the wrong hands. Some of these stories were documented police reports, court filings, tabloid covers that never went away. Others existed only as murmurs traded in dressing rooms, tour buses, and smoky after-parties. But they all had one thing in common. Patti LaBelle was there. She heard the arguments through thin hotel walls. She saw who slipped into whose limo after the cameras were gone. She watched women she admired hold themselves together on stage while their personal lives fell apart off it. And she did what survivors do in a dangerous system. She remembered. So tonight, we're opening a file the industry hoped you'd never read. Once you hear what's inside, you may never look at some of these women the same way again. We begin with the one no one ever wanted to question, Aretha Franklin, the woman the world set on a throne as the Queen of Soul. To millions, she was the embodiment of strength. The gospel roots, the regal fur coats, the demand for respect that became the soundtrack for an entire generation. But the truth is that for years, Aretha was living in two different worlds. The public saw one queen, the private circle saw another woman entirely. To understand how deep that split went, you have to go back to March 1967, the night after she recorded Respect. The song that would become an anthem for independence and power was born in a moment when Aretha herself was anything but free. That same period, she was married to Ted White, a man whose temper would later become a matter of public record. Reports from Detroit police at the time described an incident outside the 20 Grand Club, a famous nightlife spot in the city. According to those accounts, Ted allegedly became jealous after seeing Aretha talking with another male musician. Voices rose. Tension escalated. Witnesses recalled a shaken Aretha leaving the scene in tears, refusing to file a formal report. For many people on the inside, this was the first undeniable sign that the Queen of Soul was fighting private battles that didn't match the empowering lyrics pouring out of her mouth in the studio. On stage, her voice was unbreakable. Offstage, she was trying to survive a love that was unraveling in front of people who were paid to act like they saw nothing. And that was only one layer of the silence surrounding her. Throughout the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds, there were constant whispers about Aretha's personal life. It was said that she formed deep emotional connections with collaborators, people who spent long nights in the studio helping her build the sound that would define her legacy. Some people claimed those bonds crossed the line into romance. Others insisted they were just friendships that looked like more to outsiders desperate for gossip. What is certain is that Aretha guarded her private relationships fiercely. There were no public confirmations, no tabloid tell-alls, no easy answers, just closed doors and speculation that never quite died. As the daughter of Reverend C. L. Franklin, one of the most powerful preachers of his era, Aretha grew up under a pulpit's shadow. Her image wasn't just hers. It belonged to the church, to her family's reputation, to a generation that needed her to be both a voice and a symbol. Affairs, complicated romances, anything that suggested she was less than flawless, none of that fit the story that had been built around her. So she did what many women in her position felt they had to do. She protected the narrative, even if it meant burying pieces of herself. And somewhere in that same orbit was Patti LaBelle. The two women shared stages, television specials, and award show aisles. Their connection was undeniable, but so was a tension that fans could never fully explain. The most infamous moment came on a December night in 2014 at the White House during the Kennedy Center honors. Cameras captured Aretha striding past Patti without stopping to greet her. No hug, no handshake. Just a glide past that sent social media into overdrive. Viewers slowed the clip down frame by frame, dissecting every glance and movement. It was rumored that old wounds were being played out in front of the world, that the gesture came from years of unspoken friction between two powerful women who had seen too much of each other's realities. Patti later downplayed the incident, insisting there was no drama. But longtime insiders believed something deeper was at work, something that would never be explained on record. When Aretha Franklin died in 2018, tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. Her music, her activism, her legacy, all celebrated. But it was Patti's response that made people pause. Patti acknowledged that Aretha, like everyone else, had her struggles and demons. To some, it sounded like a simple, compassionate truth. To others, it felt like a quiet nod to the private battles and complicated loves that had shaped Aretha's life behind the curtain. Because that is the heart of this story. Behind the Queen of Soul was a woman who spent decades navigating a brutal industry, a controlling partner, public expectations, and the pressure of carrying an entire culture on her back. She loved, she hurt, she protected herself, and she hid the parts of her life she knew the world wasn't ready to handle. And somewhere in the hallway, or just off stage, Patti LaBelle was watching. That's why Aretha stands at the top of this list. Not as a scandal headline, but as a symbol of how far a woman can go to shield her private heart while the whole world is demanding a piece of her soul. If Aretha's world was built on secrecy, Diana Ross's story was built on something even more dangerous: power. And at Motown, power was never free. It always came with a cost, a compromise, or a quiet casualty. Diana Ross didn't just rise to become the face of the Supremes. She became the woman Motown founder, Berry Gordy, was said to have centered an entire label around. They weren't just artist and executive. According to countless insiders, they were the axis around which everything else in Hitsville, USA, spun sometimes calmly, sometimes violently. To understand how far-reaching that influence was, you have to rewind to 1965, when the private chemistry between Diana Ross and Berry Gordy reportedly crossed a line behind studio doors. Gordy was the label's president, the man holding the contracts, the budgets, the careers. Diana was the star he believed could conquer the world. Their connection wasn't written in ink, but those who worked inside Motown at the time later said you didn't need a memo to see it. You could feel the shift. Mary Wilson and Florence Ballard, co-founders of the Supremes, felt it first. Rehearsals changed. Meetings rearranged themselves around Diana's schedule. Photographer shoots started to tilt more and more toward one face, one dress, one voice. Gordy began to position Diana not just as the group's lead, but as the sole center of gravity. Sometimes it seemed as if the others were being edged out of the frame, one photo at a time. By late 1967, the tension snapped. Florence Ballard, already struggling with alcohol and personal demons, finally confronted the system she believed was pushing her aside. She challenged Berry Gordy about Diana's treatment, and the way the group she helped create was being reshaped without her. Within weeks, Flo was out removed from the Supremes, the very group she had named. Mary Wilson would later write that it felt like the day the Supremes truly died. On paper, the group continued. In the hearts of those who knew what had been sacrificed, something had already ended. For people inside Motown, there was little doubt what fueled the decision. Gordy was protecting Diana, the woman he believed in, the woman he was emotionally tied to at all costs. Then came the moment when the private story spilled into the public record. In January 1971, Diana Ross gave birth to Rhonda Ross. The later revelation that Berry Gordy was Rhonda's biological father exploded into headlines. What made it even more volatile was the timeline. Diana was publicly involved with, and soon to marry, music executive Robert Ellis Silberstein. Newspapers laid the dates out with brutal clarity. Fans felt blindsided. Many had believed in the fairy tale romance presented to them. Insiders, however, were not surprised. For them, this was simply the day the outside world finally caught up with what Motown corridors had been whispering for years. The boundary between business and personal life had never just been blurred, it had been crossed repeatedly. But that was only one layer of Diana's world. As the 1,970 seconds turned into the 1,980 seconds, another story began circulating, far away from official press releases. Rumors spread across Los Angeles nightlife about Diana being involved with a wealthy, married businessman, someone connected to film financing, high-end clubs, and exclusive events. According to people who worked around Beverly Hills parties at the time, Diana was occasionally seen slipping into private rooms with this man during charity galas and industry functions. It was said that they kept their distance in public, but behind closed doors the energy between them changed. No major outlet ever printed his name. No one ever produced hard proof. Some former staff whispered that Diana ended things because the risk was too high. Others claimed his wife discovered what was happening and threatened to go public. No version was ever officially confirmed, but the story never quite disappeared. It lived in the shadows, passed along in that low, knowing tone reserved for secrets everyone thinks they know but no one can prove. And somewhere in all of this, Patti LaBelle's presence appears again, not as a direct participant, but as a quiet observer. Unlike some of the women who kept their opinions off the record, Patti was never known for holding her tongue when she felt something. Industry voices have long said Patti and Diana were never truly close. The word that followed Diana backstage was distant, a woman fiercely committed to her image, careful with her access, demanding excellence on her terms. When Patti once described Diana as a complicated woman, it was a small sentence, but it echoed loudly. Fans immediately started connecting the dots, wondering if Patti was hinting at more than just personality. Some believed she was alluding to Diana's private entanglements, the choices she had to make to stay on top in a world built and controlled by powerful men. Patti never explained the remark. She didn't have to. The suggestion alone sent people digging back through Motown history, looking for the stories that never made it into official documentaries. What emerges from all these overlapping accounts isn't a cartoon villain or a simple victim. It's something far more unsettling. A woman navigating a system where love, power, and survival were constantly intertwined. Diana Ross moved through rooms filled with executives, husbands, lawyers, and lovers, making decisions that reshaped not only her own life, but the entire direction of Motown. Whether some of those relationships were born out of genuine love, fear, strategy, or a desperate need to protect her future, only Diana truly knows. What is clear is that every confirmed affair and every whispered rumor had consequences. Groups broke apart, friendships fractured, careers were redirected. The ripple effects of her choices reached far beyond her name on a marquee. That is why she stands as the second name on this list. Because Diana Ross's private life wasn't just dramatic, it was instrumental. As layered, calculated, and unforgettable as her climb to superstardom, her hidden affairs didn't just exist around the music industry. In many ways, they helped shape it. Whitney Houston's story has been told so many times it almost feels mythic. The angelic voice, the bright, controlled smile. The polished interviews where she laughed off rumors and leaned into the role crafted for her by Clive Davis and a carefully managed machine. To the world, she was America's golden girl, spotless, untouchable, the sound of perfection. But the truth that lived behind the applause was far from perfect. Whitney's life was a collision between the image she was selling and the reality she was surviving. Betrayals, addictions, and attachments that the public either refused to see or simply wasn't allowed to. The darkest turn began on the 18th of July, 1992, the day she married Bobby Brown. The wedding photos looked like a fairy tale, a glamorous couple smiling beneath a canopy of flowers, champagne flowing, guests cheering. But what those photographs didn't show were the nights that followed. The police calls, the walls rattling from screaming matches. The neighbors in Atlanta, who later said they heard shouting spill out into quiet suburban streets long after midnight. In 2003, the facade cracked in a way no press team could smooth over. Bobby Brown was arrested after an incident that left Whitney with visible facial injuries. Those details were not whispered rumors. They were written into official reports and broadcast on the news. The world saw glimpses of what insiders already knew. Whitney was trapped inside a marriage that fed her addictions, amplified her chaos, and turned her pain into a spectacle. But while tabloids stayed obsessed with Bobby, they missed, or ignored, another story unfolding in the shadows, one that had started long before the wedding cake was cut. Her name was Robin Crawford. For years, the industry buzzed with unspoken questions about Whitney and Robin. They met as teenagers and became inseparable. It was said that the connection between them ran deeper than friendship, but no one on the record dared to define it. Robin was at Whitney's side everywhere, backstage, on the road, in the quiet spaces where the superstar could finally exhale. Gossip swirled, but it stayed just that, gossip. Then, in 2019, Robin broke the silence in her own memoir. In those pages, she described their bond plainly. They had been in love, not a passing fling, not a misread closeness. A real relationship that helped shape who Whitney was before fame and pressure forced her to choose between authenticity and survival. Robin wrote that in 1982, Whitney ended the romantic side of their connection to protect her career from a brutally homophobic industry. The decision may have preserved the image, but it carved a permanent scar into her personal life. Even that wasn't the end of Whitney's hidden attachments. Throughout the 1,990 seconds, another rumor moved through the circles surrounding her tours and recording sessions, a story that refused to die. According to some producers and tour staff, Whitney was believed to have developed feelings for a married R&B singer during the early days of the Bodyguard tour. It was said that she lit up whenever his name came up, that their conversations lingered a little too long, their energy a little too charged. A producer who worked on her European dates claimed he once saw the man quietly step into Whitney's hotel suite around midnight and leave at sunrise. There were no photographs, no public confirmations, just a rumor passed from one insider to another, retold with the same steady, knowing tone that suggested people believed more than they were willing to admit. And while all of this swirled around her, Patti LaBelle was watching from a distance only another legend could understand. When Whitney died in 2012, tributes painted her as both angel and tragedy. But it was Patti's comment that truly cut through. She said Whitney had been surrounded by the wrong people, a simple sentence, but devastating in its implications. Coming from Patti, a woman known for speaking carefully and rarely wasting words, it sounded less like casual opinion and more like the verdict of someone who had seen the inner circle up close. Patti had shared stages with Whitney, passed her in dressing room hallways, watched her arrive with entourages that seemed more interested in access than protection. Fans believed Patti knew more than she would ever say aloud about the hidden loves, the emotional cracks, and the loneliness that made Whitney hold on to Bobby even when the relationship was destroying her. Whitney Houston's life was not a neat morality tale. It was a maze of public perfection and private heartbreak. Her forbidden loves supported her and broke her. They gave her comfort and left her exposed. They were the secrets beneath the gown, the unspoken stories behind every soaring note. And every secret she kept added another layer to the tragedy her marriage could never fully hide. Chaka Khan didn't just walk through the fire, she seemed to live inside it. From the moment she exploded onto the scene with Rufus in the early 1,970 seconds, she became the embodiment of intensity, a force of nature wrapped in sequins and smoke, with a voice that sounded like it had been dragged through every joy and every nightmare at once. Her presence was magnetic. Her reputation was dangerous. And her love life, much like her music, refused to stay within any safe limits. Chaka has never tried to paint herself as innocent. She openly admitted that during the height of her fame, she spiraled into drugs and excess. Cocaine, alcohol, sleeping pills. Years later, she would look back at the 1,980 seconds and say she was flying without wings, a chilling way to describe a life lived right at the edge of a cliff. Her relationships during that era mirrored the chaos swirling around her. In 1978, she married Richard Holland. From the outside, it looked like another rock and roll union, two lives colliding in the middle of the storm. But studio insiders described something far more volatile. Engineers said it was not unusual to hear heated arguments erupting behind closed doors just minutes before Chaka stepped up to the microphone. She could be shouting one moment and delivering a flawless, soul-shattering vocal the next. It was as if the same fire that burned through her relationships powered her art. Her documented marriages told only part of the story. The rumors filled in the rest. According to multiple former Rufus members, Chaka was believed to have become entangled in a tense love triangle with one of the band's guitarists during their late 70 Seconds touring years. The guitarist, they said, was already in a committed relationship. But night after night on the road, the chemistry between him and Chaka seemed to grow harder to hide. It was whispered that the situation finally boiled over backstage. One account claimed the guitarist's partner confronted a female member of the tour crew, convinced she was part of whatever was happening behind the scenes. The confrontation reportedly escalated into a physical altercation, shouting, pushing, chaos in the narrow hallway behind the stage. No police were called. No official statement was made. But everyone who said they were there remembered the tension that hung in the air afterward, thick and unspoken. Love wasn't the only thing that turned into a battlefield around Chaka. Her rivalries, especially with other musicians, became part of her legend. Her long-running conflict with Rufus bandmate Andre Fisher has been well documented, but insiders also spoke quietly about other clashes, particularly with women whose success or style crossed too close to Chaka's lane. One story that still circulates among musicians focuses on a rehearsal in 1985. It was said that Chaka suddenly walked out, furious, after accusing another female vocalist of stealing her sound. People in the room claimed the argument started with a simple musical suggestion and spiraled into something much more personal. Chaka allegedly left the session, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the equipment. No cameras, no official record, just the memory of a woman who refused to share space with anyone she thought was infringing on what she had bled to create. And then there was Patti LaBelle. Unlike some artists who kept their opinions soft and diplomatic, Patti had a reputation for telling the truth as she saw it, even when that truth came wrapped in affection. When asked about Chaka in an interview fans still reference, Patti chose her words carefully. She said Chaka loved hard. On the surface, it sounded simple, almost tender. But everyone who knew Chaka's history understood the code. Loved hard meant love that came like a storm, love that broke down doors, broke up sessions, and broke hearts, love that blurred the line between passion and self-destruction. Patti's comment was not an insult. It was a diagnosis from someone who had watched the same pattern replay itself over and over in green rooms, hotel hallways, and backstage corridors. Patti had seen the kind of intensity that followed Chaka around the men drawn to her, the arguments that erupted over her, the way she threw herself into relationships with the same fearless energy she used to attack a song. Behind the glamour and the legendary high notes, Chaka Khan was a woman whose love life mirrored the music she made. Bold, raw, and completely unwilling to behave. Her affairs and entanglements shaped her art, fueled her rivalries, and made her one of the most compelling and unpredictable figures in soul history. She didn't tiptoe around desire. She ran straight into it, even when it burned her. And somewhere nearby, watching another brilliant woman pay the price for loving too hard in an unforgiving industry, Patti LaBelle took note, adding another name, another story, to the mental archive she never forgot. Mary J. Blige has always been brutally honest in her music, almost to the point of bleeding on the track. Every album felt like a confession, every hook a wound she refused to hide. But as revealing as her songs were, the truth of her personal life in the 1990 seconds and early 2000s was even darker than what she dared to put on a record. During the era when Mary became the defining voice of hip-hop soul, she was also moving through one of the most destructive chapters of her life. Addiction, unresolved trauma, and a series of complicated relationships wrapped around her like chains. On the outside, she was building a legacy. On the inside, she was barely holding herself together. The public caught glimpses of the chaos but never saw the full picture. There were interviews where Mary showed up looking exhausted, hiding behind oversized sunglasses, speaking slowly, her voice trembling at the edges as if she were fighting back emotions the cameras weren't supposed to catch. There were tours abruptly cut short, fans left with vague explanations about exhaustion and health issues. Magazine covers showed a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes carrying stories the headlines never told. Everything came crashing into the open in 2016 when Mary filed for divorce from her husband and manager, Kendu Isaacs. The court documents that followed contained the most devastating detail. Kendu had allegedly been unfaithful and was accused of using Mary's own money to support another woman's lifestyle. This was not a rumor drifting around a studio. It was written into legal filings, publicly documented and dissected. For a woman who had already survived more heartbreak than most people could imagine, it was another knife to the chest. But the divorce was only the newest chapter in a much longer story. During Mary's lowest years, particularly between 1999 and 2003, when fame and addiction were colliding in the most violent way, whispers moved through the industry about a brief, unspoken romance. According to people who worked in studios in New York and Atlanta, it was said that Mary formed a quiet bond with an older rapper, a respected legend in the game, someone she leaned on emotionally while still tangled in another relationship. The story was never confirmed by either party. No one went on record, no photographs surfaced. But producers who were around her during those sessions later said the same thing in their own words. Mary was searching for love anywhere she thought it might exist. She was desperate for safety in a world that had never really given her any. One former manager recalled a night in 2001 during the recording of her No More Drama album, the project that would come to symbolize her attempt to claw her way out of the darkness. Mary had been in the vocal booth trying to finish a song about betrayal. Her voice kept cracking, not from lack of talent, but from emotion. She was crying between takes, wiping her face, trying again. When she finally walked out of the booth, drained and silent, there was a man waiting for her in the dim studio hallway. Someone she wasn't officially dating. According to that account, the two shared a quick, quiet embrace, not wild, not showy, but the kind of hug that looked like a lifeline. They released each other as soon as they realized other eyes were on them. No one ever publicly named the man, but everyone present remembered the moment. It felt less like a scandal and more like watching a woman cling to the only comfort she could find. Through all of this, Patti LaBelle remained one of the rare women in the industry who could talk to Mary without judgment or agenda. Patti often said that Mary reminded her of a younger version of herself, raw, emotional, gifted, and surrounded by people who didn't always have her best interests at heart. Patti knew what it meant to love the wrong people while trying to survive the spotlight. When Mary's divorce became public and the details started spilling through the media, Patti reportedly told friends, "Mary deserves peace. She's survived too much already." It wasn't a flashy quote for cameras. It sounded more like a quiet prayer from someone who recognized every stage of the pain. The truth is this: Mary J. Blige's affairs were never glamorous tabloid entertainment. They were survival mechanisms in a world that kept breaking her. During her darkest years, she loved recklessly, trusted blindly, and paid for it in shattered trust and deep scars. But out of that suffering came the music that not only kept her alive, but also saved an entire generation of listeners who heard their own pain in her voice. Her lowest points gave birth to songs that felt like therapy sessions the world was invited to witness. And while the affairs and private entanglements nearly destroyed her, they also fueled the honesty that made Mary J. Blige not just a star, but a lifeline. Gladys Knight built a public image on elegance and composure. Her voice carried restraint, discipline, and a kind of emotional control that felt almost regal. But the woman behind the spotlighted stages was far more complicated, marked by heartbreak, financial turmoil, addiction battles, and relationships that left wounds the audience never saw. If there was ever a period when those private storms intensified, it was her Vegas era. By the early 1980s, Gladys was performing regularly in Las Vegas, a city that looked like glitter on the outside and temptation on the inside. Neon lights, ringing slot machines, tuxedoed high rollers, and quiet penthouse suites where secrets could be tucked away behind thick curtains. Local newspapers praise her shows from that time, describing her as flawless, magnetic, and commanding. But they also began to hint at the darker truth. Gladys was struggling off stage. In later interviews, Gladys would admit that she had battled a serious gambling addiction. At one point, she said she lost more than $600,000 in a single year. That number wasn't just shocking, it was a glimpse into how deep her problems ran, while she was still expected to walk out every night and perform like nothing was wrong. The woman who sang about love and endurance was sitting at tables until sunrise, chasing losses and burying stress in the clatter of chips and cards. Vegas did not just feed her vices. According to multiple entertainment reporters who covered the Strip in the mid-1980s, it was also the setting for one of the most quietly discussed romances of her life. It was rumored that during this period, Gladys grew close to a well-known married actor who was also working in the city. Their alleged connection became casino gossip. Staff at certain hotels claimed they saw the two sharing late dinners in private lounges, far away from the main crowds. It was said they often stayed behind after rehearsals, talking in empty theaters long after everyone else had gone home. The way they stood together, the way they leaned in, suggested something deeper than casual friendship. None of this was ever confirmed on the record. No major outlet printed his name. No tell-all interview ever appeared. But the whispers persisted not as a wild scandal, but as a quiet, unresolved rumor that followed her name whenever old Vegas insiders started talking. One stagehand from the Flamingo Hotel later recalled a specific night in 1986. According to his account, he walked into a darkened ballroom and found Gladys and the actor sitting together in near silence, talking low. The two reportedly separated quickly when they realized someone else was in the room. They looked like they were sharing something heavy, he was said to have told others later, not flirting something deeper. To the people who knew her history, these stories were not surprising. Gladys had already endured 3 turbulent marriages. Her first, to James Newman in the 1960 seconds, unraveled under the weight of addiction and distance. Her second, to music executive Barry Hankerson, ended in a bitter split that left legal and emotional scars. Her third, to motivational speaker Les Brown in the 1990 seconds, lasted just 2 years before it too collapsed under pressure, conflicting schedules, and emotional strain. Each relationship added another layer of heartbreak to a woman who the public assumed had everything under control. On stage, she was unshakable. In her personal life, she was often hanging on by threads. And watching from just beyond the spotlight was Patti LaBelle. Patti and Gladys shared more than genre and era. They shared a battlefield. The music industry's relentless demands on black women who were expected to be strong, flawless, and grateful no matter what they were carrying. Patti often spoke of Gladys with deep admiration, but also in a way that hinted at knowledge she didn't fully share. In one interview, Patti said, "Gladys is stronger than people realize. She's survived storms you'll never know." Fans and insiders took that as more than poetic praise. It sounded like Patti acknowledging the unseen weight Gladys had carried through the Vegas years, the gambling losses, the failed marriages, and possibly a hidden romance that existed somewhere between comfort and danger. Gladys Knight's love life never burned across tabloid covers the way some stars did. Her story wasn't about flashy public scandals. It was about quiet tragedy, a woman searching for solace while balancing fame, addiction, financial pressure, and loneliness in a city built on illusions. If the Vegas rumors were true, then her secret affair wasn't just about betrayal or desire. It was about two people who found each other in the middle of their own private crises and tried to hold on to something real in a place designed to make everything feel like a mirage. She walked onto those Vegas stages every night in full control, every note in place. But offstage, in the hush of private rooms and backstage corridors, Gladys Knight was another name on Patti LaBelle's invisible list, another legendary woman fighting battles the crowd was never meant to see. Anita Baker's voice could quiet a crowded room. One note, and everything else seemed to blur out of focus. Smooth, velvet, untouchable. But behind that calm, honeyed tone was a life that looked nothing like the record she made. Her real story was not a quiet storm. It was a full-blown hurricane moving just beneath the surface of every love song, every ballad, every polished television performance. Through the 1,980 seconds and early 1,990 seconds, Anita became the defining sound of quiet storm, R&B. The album sold. The awards stacked up. The image looked controlled and serene. But while the public imagined candlelight and slow dances, Anita was fighting some of the most brutal, personal, romantic, and professional battles an artist can face. Many of them never fully exposed to the world. The first major crack appeared in December 1993. That month, Anita filed for divorce from her husband, Walter Bridgeforth Jr. To fans, the split might have seemed sudden, just another celebrity marriage ending. But insiders painted a different picture. It was said that the marriage had been tense for years, defined by control, arguments, and power struggles over both home and career. When the divorce filings surfaced, they revealed heated disputes over assets, royalties, and management. What looked like a breakup was really an internal war, fought in courtrooms and conference rooms instead of living rooms. It was the kind of conflict that drains an artist from the inside out, even when she still appears flawless under the stage lights. By the mid-1,990 seconds, Anita's exhaustion was beginning to show. At some award shows, observers noticed a shift. The always composed diva now carried a tight, tired smile, as if she were holding herself together by sheer will. Then, in 1996, the storm moved from her home into her business in the most public way yet. Anita found herself locked in a brutal legal battle with Elektra Records. The label accused her of refusing to deliver an album on schedule. Anita fired back, accusing the company of financial manipulation and unfair treatment. In a rare and risky move for an artist of her stature, she stepped into the spotlight and spoke out, telling the press, "I'm being controlled, and I won't allow it anymore." On the surface, she was talking about a record label, but for those who knew her situation, the statement had a double edge. Insiders whispered that Anita wasn't just rebelling against a corporate machine, she was pushing back against someone much closer. That rumor followed her for decades, that Anita had fallen deeply in love with a man tied directly to her management team. Not a casual fling, not a rumor built on a passing glance. Something real, complicated, and forbidden. According to one longtime producer, the man was married and had worked with Anita going back to her Chapter 8 days. Studio staff claimed the chemistry between them during late-night sessions from 1988 to 1990 was impossible to ignore. The way they spoke in corners, the long looks through glass booth windows, the tension that could be felt even when no one said a word. One engineer recalled a night in March 1989 that he never forgot. Anita was in the booth, working through a vocal line she had sung 1,000 times before. Suddenly, she cut the take short, pulled off her headphones, and walked out without warning. According to his account, she went straight to the man from her team and confronted him in a heated, whisper-shouted argument just outside the control room. She looked devastated, he later said, like she had just learned something she was never meant to hear. After that, rumors spread that the relationship ended abruptly, not with a conversation, but with a rupture. Some believed that what happened between them didn't just break Anita's heart. It shattered the trust at the center of her professional world and poisoned everything that came after. There were quiet suggestions that this personal fallout helped fuel the legal chaos with her label and management, turning her career into a battleground where love, money, and control all collided. And somewhere just beyond the blast radius was Patti LaBelle. Patti never went on record with details. That was not her way. But in one interview, she slipped out a line that fans never forgot. "Anita is a beautiful soul, but she trusted the wrong people." To outsiders, it sounded like a simple protective compliment. To those who knew the whispers, it felt like something else. A coded acknowledgement that Anita's deepest wounds came from those who were supposed to protect her. Patti and Anita crossed the same stages, the same award shows, the same late-night radio promotions and industry gatherings. Patti heard what people were afraid to say out loud. She saw the fatigue, the guarded smiles, the way Anita began to retreat from the noise. By the early 2000s, Anita Baker stepped back from the spotlight almost entirely. Officially, she cited exhaustion, legal pressure, and the need for personal healing. But people close to her said she was doing more than just resting. She was escaping from a broken marriage, from a management structure she no longer trusted, and from a love that had become too painful, too costly to stay near. Her voice somehow remained untouched, soft yet fierce, comforting yet sharp enough to cut through any lie. But the storms behind that voice were powerful enough to nearly silence her for good. Anita Baker's story is not just about contracts or court dates. It is about what happens when love, business, and control are tied together so tightly that they become indistinguishable. And somewhere in that tangle, another name was added to Patti LaBelle's mental archive of women who gave the world their sound while the industry quietly fed on their hearts. Stephanie Mills stepped into the spotlight earlier than most people ever get the chance. At just 17 years old, she became a Broadway revelation as Dorothy in The Wiz in 1975. Audiences heard that small frame and impossibly big voice and instantly believed they were witnessing something pure, hopeful, almost innocent. Her vocals were electric, trembling with emotion, the kind of sound that felt like it could save a broken world. But the innocence people projected onto her was never the whole story. Behind the curtains, in rehearsal halls and backstage corridors, Stephanie was moving through a very adult world, one full of passion, heartbreak, and forbidden connections that would shape not just her career, but the way she learned to love. The public knows the soft-focus version of her early years, the teenage relationship with Michael Jackson. They met while working on the Wiz film adaptation in 1977 and quickly became close. Stephanie later said, "We were very much in love," confirming what fans had suspected for decades. To the outside world, it was a fairy tale two prodigies, young, gifted, and bonded by shared pressure. But while Michael was being pulled deeper into global superstardom, Stephanie was being pulled into something far more complicated. By the early 1980 seconds, the energy around her life had shifted. Broadway insiders began whispering about a relationship that never made it into glossy magazines or official biographies. It was said that Stephanie had fallen deeply for a fellow stage actor, a man who was already married. The affair allegedly lived in the spaces where only theater people go, dim wings, dressing rooms, rehearsal studios, after midnight. A former castmate from The Wiz revival in 1982 claimed he saw them once in a dark corner of the Winter Garden Theater, holding hands after a late rehearsal, heads bowed, talking quietly, like people who knew they shouldn't be seen. Another dancer later recalled a night when the actor slipped out of Stephanie's dressing room at 1 a.m. during a period when both of them were supposed to be rehearsing separately. None of this ever appeared in print. No tabloid splashed it on the front page. But Broadway has a long memory, and the whispers never quite disappeared. According to those backstage stories, the romance ignited during intense rehearsal weeks for a summer production where Stephanie and the actor spent long hours working through duets, tightening choreography, and sharing the kind of emotionally raw conversations that only happen when two performers are carrying too much weight at once. One producer described their connection as electric, like something they were both trying to hide and couldn't quite control. As with many secret stage romances, the turning point came quietly and brutally. In October 1984, Stephanie abruptly withdrew from a major stage project she had been attached to for months. To the press, she chalked it up to exhaustion and emotional strain. But backstage staff told a quieter version, that Stephanie broke down after learning the actor's wife had confronted him and, according to some accounts, threatened to expose the affair if it didn't end. Whether that confrontation actually happened has never been fully verified. There are no official records, no public statements, just the timing, the sudden withdrawal, and the way everyone involved seems to remember the same emotional collapse. What is documented is what followed. Stephanie's love life became a series of short, intense, and ultimately fractured marriages. She married Jeffrey Daniel of Shalimar in 1980. The marriage ended. In 1989, she wed Dino Meminger. That marriage dissolved as well. In 1993, she married Michael Saunders. It, too, ended after only a few years. Friends later said Stephanie carried unresolved pain from those early Broadway years into every relationship that came after, scars from loving men who were already spoken for, and from learning the hard way that some loves are never meant to be acknowledged in daylight. This is where Patti LaBelle's shadow quietly re-enters the story. Fans still talk about an interview Patti gave in the late 1990 seconds, where she said, "Stephanie has a good heart, she just fell for the wrong man back then." Patti didn't offer a name. She didn't need to. People who had worked in Broadway and R&B circles in the 1980 seconds already knew which rumor that sentence was brushing against. Patti and Stephanie crossed paths as two powerful voices in an industry that thrived on secrets. Patti understood what it meant to have your most vulnerable moments happen in wings and green rooms, while the world only saw the standing ovations. When she spoke about Stephanie, it sounded less like gossip and more like a quiet acknowledgement of what it costs to love the wrong person in a world where every move can be weaponized. Stephanie Mills' career soared because of what she could do with her voice. But her love life unfolded in the shadows, behind velvet curtains and orchestra pits, in stolen glances with married co-stars, whispered conversations at stage doors, and breakdowns the audience never witnessed. On stage, she was Dorothy, reaching for home. Off stage, she was another woman in Patti LaBelle's unwritten ledger, someone who learned that, in the theater world, the brightest spotlights can cast the darkest shadows. What happens when the most glamorous woman in the country loses everything because of a decision she made before anyone knew her name? Vanessa Williams' rise and fall in the 1980 seconds remains one of the most dramatic stories in American entertainment. A collision of beauty, betrayal, race, and survival that permanently changed how black women were seen in pageants and pop culture. Her story officially begins on the 17th of September, 1983. That night, Vanessa Lynn Williams made history as the first Black Miss America. The image is burned into the national memory. The crown, the tears, the stunned applause. She was brilliant, poised, and seemingly unstoppable, a symbol of progress in a country still wrestling with its own reflection. But less than a year later, that crown would not simply slip, it would be ripped away. In July 1984, Penthouse magazine published nude photos of Vanessa that had been taken years earlier when she was around 19. The photos, according to multiple accounts, were never meant to be made public. The photographer had reportedly promised they would remain private, a lie that would cost her everything. When the images hit stands, the Miss America organization reacted swiftly and mercilessly. Under pressure, Vanessa resigned her title, making her the first Miss America in history to step down. Overnight, she went from groundbreaking icon to tabloid target. Commentators labeled her a disgrace. Cameras followed her every move. She later said there were days when the humiliation was so overwhelming she could barely bring herself to leave her home. What the public did not fully understand at the time was how deeply she had been betrayed, not just by a system eager to judge her, but by the person who released those images without her consent. Her downfall became a public spectacle, but the violation at the center of it remained deeply personal. Then came the second heartbreak. In 1987, Vanessa married public relations specialist Ramon Hervey II, a man who had helped her navigate the wreckage and rebuild a career that many thought was over. For a while, it appeared the two were winning against the odds. They had 3 children, worked together, and seemed to be proving that life after scandal was not only possible, but powerful. But by the late 1992, their marriage collapsed. Their divorce was finalized in 1997, and reports at the time linked the split to infidelity and growing distance between them. For a woman whose entire public life had been defined by betrayal, it was another brutal chapter, this time written not on front pages, but in legal documents and quiet interviews. And then there was the rumor that followed her through the music industry, the one that never quite faded. While recording her second album, The Comfort Zone, in the early 1990s, it was whispered that Vanessa developed strong feelings for a music producer tied to the project. Studio insiders claimed the chemistry between them was unmistakable. They recall late-night sessions when the two stayed behind in the control room, talking softly long after the rest of the team had gone home. Hallway conversations that looked more like intimate exchanges than simple creative discussions. No name was ever publicly attached to the story. No hard proof ever surfaced. But people who worked around the album later suggested that the emotional weight in some of her performances came from a very real place, from feelings that went far beyond the official narrative of a professional collaboration. It was said that whatever happened between them was intense, complicated, and quietly shelved away when the cost became too high. This is where Patti LaBelle's shadow brushes against Vanessa's story. Patti never called out Vanessa directly. That wasn't her style. But during a panel discussion about fame and womanhood, Patti remarked that when a woman is in the process of rebuilding her life, she can become dangerously vulnerable to the wrong men. Fans and observers couldn't help but connect the dots. To them, it sounded like a subtle, coded nod to women like Vanessa women, who had their lives blown apart in public and then had to pick up the pieces while still trying to love, trust, and hope in an industry that had already shown them how brutal it could be. The truth, however, is that Vanessa Williams's life is not defined by scandal. It is defined by what she did after. After losing her crown, she could have disappeared. Instead, she rebuilt her career piece by piece. She earned Grammy nominations, conquered Broadway, appeared in films, and became a television star. She transformed herself from a symbol of shame into a symbol of resilience. Still, the hidden chapters remain: the rumored affair, the private heartbreak, the producer whose name never left the walls of the studio. These are the pieces of her story that were never officially written but still haunt the margins. Vanessa Williams was the woman America tried to break in front of the world. Instead, she learned how to survive the breaking and become bigger than the scandal that was supposed to define her forever. What happens when a voice powerful enough to shake a theater is carrying a heartbreak nobody can see? Jennifer Holliday's life is a story of staggering talent and crushing isolation, of whispered romances and very public betrayals, all orbiting the musical that turned her into a legend, Dreamgirls, and the fame that nearly destroyed her. Her story erupts into view on the 20th of December, 1981, opening night of Dreamgirls on Broadway. When Jennifer stepped forward and unleashed "And I Am Telling You I'm Not Going," the audience didn't just clap, they erupted. Critics compared her performance to an earthquake, a force so raw and emotional it felt almost dangerous. She was 21 years old, and in a single song she became the voice of every person who had ever begged not to be abandoned. But behind that triumph, Jennifer's life was already fraying. During the original run of Dreamgirls, Jennifer spiraled into severe depression. The pressure, the grueling schedule, the scrutiny over her weight, and the emotional demands of performing that kind of heartbreak, night after night, took a heavy toll. By 1982, she was already fighting for her life in a way few fans realized. She later revealed that she had attempted suicide during that period, a brave, devastating confession that exposed just how much pain was hiding behind the applause. On stage, she was unstoppable. Offstage, she felt utterly alone. Her relationships reflected that turmoil. In 1991, Jennifer married keyboardist Billy Meadows. The marriage lasted just 9 months. It was over almost as quickly as it had begun, leaving behind another shard of disappointment in a life already filled with emotional wreckage. Her second marriage, to minister Andre Woods in 1993, ended even more chaotically. Woods was accused of cashing checks written to Jennifer without her knowledge. Their breakup became a small media circus, treated like a sideshow by some outlets. Beneath the headlines, however, was a woman who had trusted deeply and been wounded just as deeply, a pattern that seemed determined to repeat itself. Then there is the rumor Broadway still talks about in lower tones. During her early years with Dreamgirls, it was whispered that Jennifer fell in love with a member of her touring band, a talented musician who reportedly kept their relationship hidden due to a restrictive contract and fear that being exposed could cost him his job. One chorus member from the 1983 touring production claimed she once saw Jennifer and the musician holding hands backstage before a matinee, standing close in a shadowed corner, eyes locked in a way that said more than words. Another person said the two exchanged letters, leaving them tucked into dressing room mirrors to avoid being seen talking too often. The romance, if it truly unfolded that way, did not last. According to the stories passed around cast members, contractual issues and tension with producers eventually placed the musician in an impossible position. It was said that he ended things abruptly, not with a long conversation, but with a sudden distance that left Jennifer heartbroken and confused. Castmates would later swear they could hear that heartbreak in her voice every night. The way she delivered "and I am telling you I'm not going" shifted, becoming even more raw, more jagged, like she was singing directly to a love she had lost but still couldn't let go of. This is the world Patti LaBelle understands better than most. The world of backstage suffering, where the strongest voices often belong to the people carrying the heaviest pain. Patti never named Jennifer directly when she spoke on this subject, but she once said, "Many of us suffered backstage. Some of the strongest voices came from the deepest hurt." Broadway fans and insiders have long believed that line applied perfectly to Jennifer Holliday. Jennifer's life is not just about drama or gossip. It is about survival in an industry that will gladly take everything you have and offer very little protection in return. She battled depression. She lived through 2 marriages that ended in public and private heartbreak. She fought to hold on to a love that contracts and fear forced into silence. Through it all, her voice trembling, thunderous, impossibly honest, told the story she was never fully allowed to say outright. In the end, these 10 stories pull back the same curtain. They reveal a truth the public was never meant to hear. Behind every legendary voice is a life crowded with secrets, betrayals, forbidden loves, and silent battles that shape the very music we still worship. Patti LaBelle did not speak on these women to shame them. She illuminated the system that demanded their perfection while exploiting their vulnerability, the machine that forced them to hide, to endure, and to survive in the shadows. And now the question is no longer hers, it's yours. Which of these hidden affairs do you believe altered music history the most? Which story do you think is still being covered up, still protected by lawyers, silence, and time? If you want more untold stories, deeper investigations, and the truths the industry still refuses to say out loud, you already know what to do. Stay close, because the next chapter, waiting